Welcome to Save Us From Hell, a podcast about the United Nations. I am your co-host, Mark Leon Goldberg. I am the editor-in-chief of UN Dispatch, and I host the Global Dispatches podcast as well.
And I'm Anjali Dayal. I'm an associate professor of international relations at Fordham University in New York. I teach and I do research, and I write about the United Nations.
So, Anjali, let's talk about this United Nations Convention on Cybercrime. You know, we call this podcast To Save Us From Hell. Mm-hmm. Based on most of what I've read about this United Nations Convention on Cybercrime, the people I've talked to, not only will this United Nations Convention on Cybercrime potentially not avert us from hell, but might accelerate our descent into that fiery furnace. This is a good example of, I believe, a United Nations treaty process gone bad.
So a lot of the objections to the Cybercrime Treaty revolve around this idea that what it actually does is that it provides authoritarian governments with a whole range of tools to crack down on dissidents, on journalists, on human rights activists, without actually providing a framework for mitigating those potential crimes, right? People usually say we can divide cybercrime into two different kinds of buckets, right? We can talk about cyber-dependent crimes that can only happen using cyber tools, things like ransomware and hacking, and crimes that are cyber-enabled. Where cyber-enabled crimes are crimes that might occur in any other circumstance, things like fraud, things like child sexual abuse is the key one in many places, right? But the treaty doesn't differentiate between these two, leaving the door open for a treaty like this to set norms that might actually enable the repression of journalists who are doing things like investigating the practices of governments or doing things like whistleblowing. Right? It leaves it open to governments to define the parameters of what constitutes a serious crime and only sets a year threshold, 4 years, right? Not a content threshold, what constitutes a serious crime and what constitutes a serious cybercrime. So with a lot of deference to domestic law and a lot of latitude under sort of the international framework they're providing and not a lot of explicit human rights safeguards, this treaty has become a flashpoint between international civil society and civil libertarians, and between member states who see a pressing problem in the world, right? Growing spate of cybercrime worldwide that targets them in ways that are often being spearheaded by governments with a strong interest in repressing activism and free speech.
The entirety of today's episode, it's going to be exclusively for premium subscribers. Folks, listen, we need your support to keep this show going every week. So please get a paid subscription via globaldispatches.org. You can follow a link in the show notes of this episode. Please visit globaldispatches.org to help us bring you this show week in, week out in perpetuity.
We'll be here August after August while everyone else is out of the office whitewater rafting and, spelunking in caves in Catalonia.
We're also about to plan our big September coverage as well, which is always fun. I love UNGA week. It's my favorite week of the year, even though I think most other international affairs media tend to dread it. To me, it's, to use a sports metaphor, it's my Super Bowl. I love it.
Most international media and most New Yorkers whose traffic situation goes from terrible to even worse.